Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter, hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche geht es um folgende Themen. Außenministertreffen der NATO in Brüssel. Soll die Ukraine im Eilverfahren in die NATO aufgenommen werden? Waffenruhe zwischen Hamas und Israel. Wie hat sie beiden Seiten genutzt? Und Nordkorea startet einen Spionage-Satelliten. Ein neuer Sputnik-Schock für die USA? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir wieder die Zeit genommen hast. Wie geht's dir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Das freut mich. Scott, wenn du möchtest, blicken wir direkt auf die erste Frage. Denn auf dem Außenministertreffen der NATO in Brüssel schwor NATO-Generalsekretär Jens Stoltenberg das Bündnis auf eine langwierige Unterstützung der Ukraine ein. Er betonte, dass die Ukraine einem NATO-Beitritt näher sei als je zuvor. Für die Ukraine würde ein Eilverfahren für den Beitritt eingeleitet, wenn die NATO-Mitglieder sich darauf einigen. Gleichzeitig warnte Stoltenberg, dass man Russland nicht unterschätzen dürfe. Trotz aller Unterstützung habe die Ukraine es nicht geschafft, entscheidende Geländegewinne zu erzielen. Das führte Stoltenberg vor allem auf das Funktionieren der russischen Rüstungsindustrie zurück. Was sagst du zu diesen widersprüchlichen Aussagen? Wird die Ukraine tatsächlich in die NATO eintreten und wie stellt sich die NATO eine langwierige Unterstützung der Ukraine vor?
Let's just keep in mind why Russia initiated the special military operation to begin with. It was to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Ukraine will never join NATO. Ukraine will never be a NATO member. Jens Stoltenberg can come up with ever fantasy-driven lunacy he wants to, but his words will not translate into Ukrainian membership in NATO. It just won't happen. Russia won't let it happen. Russia is in the process of destroying Ukraine because NATO continued to push for Ukrainian membership. Ukraine doesn't qualify for NATO membership. Ukraine is not economically capable of being a member of NATO. It's not militarily capable of being a member of NATO. This is lunacy of the highest order, but what do we expect from someone like Jens Stoltenberg, who has been nothing but crazy in the last months every time he opens his mouth about Russia and Ukraine? The one thing he has gotten right is that Russia's defense industry is a very capable force, one that right now is putting NATO's defense industry to shame. NATO has not been able to meet its obligations to Ukraine regarding the provision of artillery ammunition. Russia, on the other hand, has kept the Russian military fully stocked with artillery ammunition, and this differential is one of many factors that is contributing to the ongoing Russian military victory against Ukraine. But let me just make it clear: Ukraine will never, ever, ever be a member of NATO.
Was hältst du von den Worten des ukrainischen Außenministers Dmitri Kuleba, dass die ukrainische Armee de facto eine NATO-Armee sei?
It's as irrelevant as he is. Who cares? Who cares what he says? Who cares what he thinks? If he was a military man, he'd shed his uniform, his suit, and go to the front line, die like the rest of the Ukrainian armed forces. It's not a NATO army. It's been equipped by older NATO equipment. The notion that they've been trained to a NATO standard is absurd in the extreme. America is trained to a NATO standard. The Ukraine is not. America would never dream of taking somebody off the streets, giving them a week's worth of training, throwing them in the front lines. That's the Ukrainian standard. At best, a Ukrainian soldier is given 40 days of training before and sent to the front line. That is not a NATO standard. Ukrainian soldiers can't carry out any of the tasks that are normally assigned to NATO. They've proven that in this counteroffensive. They're incapable of combined arms operations. This is lunacy of the highest order, but that's what we've come to expect from Kuleba and the rest of the Ukrainian officials who are part of a Zelensky regime that is so far removed from reality as to be, dangerous.
Lass uns in Sachen Rüstungsindustrie ins Detail gehen. Trotz umfassender Sanktionen seitens der EU und der USA ist es Russland gelungen, Seine Wirtschaft insgesamt, aber auch die für die Verteidigung relevanten Wirtschaftssegmente nicht nur zu bewahren, sondern sogar hochzukurbeln. Statt Munitionsmangel zu leiden, wie vom Westen beständig prophezeit, steht die russische Rüstungsindustrie stärker da als je zuvor, wie sogar Stoltenberg eingestehen muss. Woher kommt diese Robustheit der russischen Rüstungsindustrie und warum hinken die NATO-Staaten so weit hinterher?
Well, I think we need to understand that NATO and Russia have been on separate trajectories for some time now. NATO has operated under a working assumption that Russia was a fundamentally weakened nation with a dysfunctional economy that could be easily undermined through the imposition of stringent economic sanctions. This was the heart of the NATO-driven strategy to bring down Russia. And so if you don't take your opponents seriously, you don't prepare adequately for any threat that comes from your opponent. So what I mean by that is if you don't believe that the Russians are capable of mobilizing their defense industry in any materially important manner, you don't prepare your defense industry for that kind of mobilization. NATO is ill prepared for this. We see the proof is in the pudding. They can't get their defense industry up and running in any timely fashion, in any qualitative fashion, especially when their economy is suffering so heavily because of the blowback from the sanctions. I think the French tire company Michelin just shut down their German plant because they can't afford to stay in operations. And this has been happening over and over and over again. Russia, meanwhile, has taken a look at the expansion of NATO. They've continually called out to NATO to stop this irresponsible expansion. Russia learned from the 2008 conflict with Georgia that there were some deficiencies in the way that Russia was organized, equipped, and trained for war against the NATO enemy, and they began to reconfigure their military. Russia's been preparing to fight a NATO threat for some time now, so their military industry has been constantly developing weapons and that are capable of fighting a NATO-style enemy. And then since 2014, Russia has been, singularly focused on preparing its military to fight a NATO threat. The Russian defense industry, while it is, not immune to, the market, so to speak, it has to try to operate at a profit. It's not profit driven like the Western defense industry. It's driven by the necessity of supporting the defense establishment, the defense needs, the national security requirements. And so when Russia receives the Russian defense industry receives a requirement from the military, they seek to turn it around as quickly as possible in the most economic manner as possible, also in the one that answers the problem sufficiently. We only have to take a look at how Russia has been able to field new weapon systems within the time frame of the special military operation. They learn things about how the West operates, then they define a weapons need, and then the defense industry produces it. At the same time, they're producing the existing standard. The Russian defense industry is responsive to the needs of the Russian military. Western defense industry is not. It's responsive only to the needs of the shareholder. Their goal is to make money, not to produce good weapons. And we're seeing that play out on the battlefield in Ukraine today.
Schauen wir auf Deutschland. Wir sprachen ja bereits letzte Woche darüber, dass die Bundesregierung plant, ihre Kriegsunterstützung für die Ukraine im kommenden Jahr auf 8 Milliarden Euro zu erhöhen. Gegen diese Pläne mehrt sich die Kritik auch aus der Opposition. So mahnte der stellvertretende Vorsitzende der CDU-Fraktion im Bundestag, Johann Wadepool, dass die zusätzlichen Mittel besser zur Stärkung der eigenen Verteidigungsfähigkeiten und zur Aufrüstung der Bundeswehr eingesetzt werden sollten. Wadepool behauptete, dass die deutschen Truppen maximal 2 Tage in einem Gefecht durchhalten könnten. Teilst du diese Einschätzung? Wie schlimm steht es um die Kampffähigkeiten der Bundeswehr?
I disagree with the assessment. I doubt the German army could last one day in battle. I believe they drop their weapons and run or die. They're incapable of fighting a modern enemy because they haven't prepared to fight a modern enemy. It's that simple. Germany will have a hard time getting its army out of the barracks, let alone onto a battlefield. And sustaining that army on a battlefield against an enemy like Russia would be impossible. I also would disagree that Germany needs to turn to its own defensive needs. Russia doesn't pose a threat to Germany. Let me say that one more time for the German audience. Russia does not pose a threat to Germany. So why does Germany need to bankrupt itself building a military that it doesn't need? Does Germany propose to build a military capable of defeating 1.5 million Russians? That's the size of the Russian army today. Why would Germany need that kind of army? Does Germany really need a military capable of projecting power into the Baltics, into Ukraine, into Romania? These are things that Germany did back in the 1940s. It didn't work out too well for Germany back then. Germany, like any sovereign state, has a legitimate right of self-defense and should have a military capable of providing that self-defense. But who is Germany defending itself from? Only one nation has attacked Germany in the last year, and that's the United States that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Is Germany indeed talking about strengthening its navy to protect its strategic infrastructure from American attacks? No. So this is stupidity in the extreme. Germany needs to protect Germany, but the best way to protect Germany is to create normalized relations with its neighbors, including Russia, so that economies can function smoothly. The best way for a German to be secure is for a German to have a good job, a good paycheck, accessibility to affordable energy, and a nice standard of living. You're not going to get that by continuing to sanction Russia and thinking you can build a military capable of standing toe-to-toe with Russia. Germany will never have that military, and it's stupid to even think about trying to build one.
Lass uns über die Feuerpause zwischen Hamas und Israel sprechen, die Ende vergangener Woche in Kraft trat. Beide Seiten ging es dabei vornehmlich um den Austausch von Gefangenen bzw. Geiseln. Erstaunlich ist, dass die israelische Regierung unter Benjamin Netanyahu jegliche Verhandlungen mit der Hamas zu Beginn des Konfliktes kategorisch ausgeschlossen hatte. Nun scheint ein Umdenken stattgefunden zu haben. Obwohl Netanyahu behauptet, nach Ablauf der Feuerpause werde Israel mit voller Härte wieder zuschlagen, sind die getroffenen Absprachen mit der Hamas ein deutliches Signal an die Welt und keines der israelischen Stärke. Woher kam der Sinneswandel bei Netanyahu? Warum hat Israel die Feuerpause mit der Hamas geschlossen und nutzt diese nicht der Hamas, um ihre Stellungen zu stärken?
Hamas initiated this conflict with an attack on October 7th that was designed to trigger an Israeli response. And Israel responded exactly the way Hamas thought they would, with overwhelming force targeting exclusively civilians. Hamas is underground, and Israel has not inflicted any meaningful damage against the Hamas military infrastructure. Hamas wanted this attack to generate three primary things. One, international discussion about a Palestinian state. In this, Hamas has been extraordinarily successful. Everybody's talking about the creation of a Palestinian state. Two, Hamas wanted the Palestinians who were held prisoner by the Israelis to be freed. In order to achieve this, Hamas took Israelis hostage with the goal of using them as a mechanism to exchange for the Palestinians held hostage. This is happening. Hamas is winning. This is what Hamas wanted. And the third, of course, is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine in Islam, which was desecrated on a regular basis by Israel. Hamas has the entire Islamic world rallied behind the cause of preserving the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel, on the other hand, stated at the beginning of this operation that it would not end until Hamas was destroyed militarily and politically, that Hamas would be eliminated as an organization. Israel has failed to come even close to achieving this. Today, Hamas is has more popularity amongst the Palestinian people than ever before. It's the only Palestinian governmental entity that is advocating for the creation of a Palestinian state. The Palestinian Authority, on the other hand, led by President Mahmoud Abbas, has become a subservient client of Israel, doing what Israel wants, arresting Palestinians on behalf of Israel. The idea that Hamas is defeated and can be defeated is ludicrous. And this is the reality that Benjamin Netanyahu has come face to face with. One, the Israeli Defense Forces not beating Hamas. They took over certain territories in northern Gaza, but Hamas operates under the ground, and Hamas has been able to come up through its tunnels and ambush Israeli tanks, ambush Israeli soldiers, and inflicting a death by 1,000 cuts. The Israeli newspapers provide some insight into why Benjamin Netanyahu had a change of heart. When you have entire battalions of the Israeli army refusing to fight in Gaza, running away from the fight because they're scared of Hamas, what does it tell you who's winning the battle? The Israeli military or Hamas? Benjamin Netanyahu had no choice but to accept a ceasefire that he said he would never agree to. Hamas from the very beginning said, yeah, we'd like to have a ceasefire to exchange prisoners. Benjamin Netanyahu said there will be no ceasefire, there will be no exchange. And yet today we have a ceasefire and an exchange. Who's winning this fight? I think it's clear that the Israelis are incapable of determining the outcome of this conflict. Hamas is in the driver's seat. They've been in the driver's seat since day one. And I think Hamas will achieve all of its objectives when the fighting finally stops.
Was wird passieren, wenn der Waffenstillstand zu Ende ist? Wird Israel wieder mit der Bombardierung des Gazastreifens beginnen? Werden sie ihren Krieg gegen die Hamas fortsetzen?
I think Hamas is trying to keep this ceasefire extended by, releasing prisoners in small batches. And as long as Hamas is willing to release prisoners, it's going to be very difficult for the Israeli government to justify resuming what was at the time that they stopped a failed offensive. Netanyahu can talk big, but what's going to happen? Is he going to send his tanks and his soldiers back into Gaza where they're going to die again? Are they going to bomb more buildings, kill more Palestinians, getting the world to turn further against them? There's nothing Israel can do that leads to a positive outcome for Israel. So I'm not saying it's impossible that Israel will resume the offensive. Benjamin Netanyahu's fighting for his political life. But what I will say is that if they do resume the offensive, it just hastens his political demise. He is a prime minister whose time has passed. He's a failed leader of Israel. And right now he's holding on to power only because of the prisoner exchange. But if he goes back to war, I think the Israeli people will have had enough with Benjamin Netanyahu, and you're going to see him pushed from power.
Blicken wir nach Asien. Vergangene Woche ist Nordkorea nach eigenen Angaben ein Durchbruch im Einsatz von Spionage-Satelliten gelungen. Der oberste nordkoreanische Führer Kim Jong-un sprach sogar von einer neuen Ära der Weltraummacht, in die sein Land hineingetreten sei. Diese Woche gab Nordkorea bekannt, dass es politische wie militärische Ziele innerhalb der Vereinigten Staaten ausspioniert habe, so etwa das Pentagon, das Weiße Haus und US-Basen im Pazifik. Wie bewertest du die Angaben Nordkoreas? Haben sie tatsächlich einen Spionagesatelliten im Orbit? Stellt diese eine Bedrohung dar für die USA bzw. den Westen, und in welcher Relation steht dieser eine Spionagesatellit zu dem Spionageapparat der USA im Weltraum?
There's no reason to doubt the North Koreans because it's not impossible to build a satellite or to field a satellite. It's very rare that a nation puts up a first generation imagery satellite and it suddenly has high resolution imagery, that's repeatable. We have one satellite going around the Earth, taking pictures here and there. Apparently it's digital, so they're transmitting the imagery down to a receiving station in North Korea. Yay. It doesn't change anything. You can get better intelligence probably from Google Maps than you can, or Google Earth, than you can from North Korean satellite. But what it represents is an advancement, a technological advancement that now North Korea can improve on and build upon and refine. And given the state of technology today, North Korea's advancements aren't going to come over the course of decades, but over the course of months and years. They're going to be able to rapidly advance. And now that North Korea is actively cooperating with Russia in the field of satellite, satellite technology, I think you're going to see North Korea's capabilities improve tremendously. And if they can get a satellite that can go into geosynchronous orbit over the Korean Peninsula, over Japan, and has sufficient resolution, now you've got a problem, because now they can track U.S. military and Japanese and South Korean military deployments in near real time, and they can use that intelligence for targeting purposes, and that would be a big problem for the United States.
Kannst du da bitte ins Detail gehen? Wie werden die USA mit anderen Mächten wie Nordkorea, China oder Russland umgehen, wenn sie ihre Spionage-Satellitenkapazitäten ausbauen?
Well, the U.S. can't stop them. That's, the U.S. may not be happy, but there's nothing they can do. Russia and China have advanced intelligence collection capabilities, just like the United States does. It's a reality. They have the ability to shoot down American satellites like we have the ability to shoot down theirs. What it does is it proves that any future conflict is going to be a far more complicated war than people currently believe. Right now we use satellites not just to take pictures, but to communicate. Every aspect of our modern communications is satellite driven, especially long distance communications. And when you have that kind of connectivity throughout your military, from the tactical level, operational level, strategic level, it becomes a vulnerability. And what we're seeing right now, I think, is a growing recognition on the part of the United States that while we train to fight a war with perfect communications, the reality is when we go to war, we're going to have no communications, because those satellites will be shot down, will be made inoperable. And that means that the U.S. military's capabilities will diminish tremendously. And it's a scary thing to have invested literally hundreds of billions of dollars into satellite technology that will become useless on day one of any future war.
Vergangene Woche sprachen wir über die neuen iranischen Hyperschallraketen, diese Woche nun über den nordkoreanischen Spionagesatelliten. Unsere Zuschauer haben dabei den Begriff des Sputnik-Schocks in die Diskussion eingebracht. Als die Sowjetunion im Jahr 1957 den ersten künstlichen Satelliten startete, hatte das eine gewaltige Wirkung auf den Westen. Fast so, als hätte man den geopolitischen Gegner bis dahin völlig unterschätzt, starteten umfassende Bildungs- und Propagandaprojekte insbesondere in den USA, um einerseits die eigene Bevölkerung wettbewerbsfähiger zu machen im Kalten Krieg, andererseits die intellektuelle Anziehungskraft der Sowjetunion zu dämpfen. Ist so etwas heute noch vorstellbar? Oder war der Sputnik-Schock eine einzigartige historische Konstellation? Könnten die eigenständigen Entwicklungen etwa in Iran oder Nordkorea und die zunehmende Multipolarität einen ähnlichen Schock auslösen im Westen, der wie damals droht, abgehängt zu werden?
Sputnik was a unique time in history. First of all, it was the first satellite. So nobody knew what a satellite was. Nobody knew what it could do. It was just a great unknown. Today, I think it's hard to get that equivalency of Sputnik-Shock because everybody is familiar with technology. I I think the shock comes from the arrogance that exists in the United States that we alone have this technical capability, we or our European or Asian allies, that those Iranians could never operate to the same level as we do. The Russians certainly can't because they have to steal microchips out of washing machines to make their missiles fly. This arrogance is there. And I think the shock comes when we realize that not only are our opponents as capable as we are, in many cases, they're better than we are. That's where the shock comes in. With Sputnik, it was a fear of the unknown. Now what it is a recognition that we're no longer supreme. And when you've been the bully for so long, when you've been arrogant for so long, suddenly to go out into the schoolyard and realize that over the summer, the skinny kid that you picked on last spring has been lifting weights and has put on 50 pounds and he can crush you like a, walnut. That's a shock. So it's a different kind of shock, but it's a shock nonetheless.
Scott, vielen Dank für deine Zeit und wie immer für deine aufschlussreichen Analysen. Wir freuen uns auf nächste Woche. Dankeschön.
Okay, thank you.
Meine lieben Zuschauer, auch an euch herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, dann teilt das Video doch bitte breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol, folgt uns unbedingt auch auf den Plattformen Odyssey und X, ehemals Twitter, und vor allem, wenn ihr mal Fragen habt, die wir unbedingt an Scott Ritter stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns doch in die Kommentare. Ich freue mich auf euch, eure Monique.